Hello, and welcome to part 4 of InRetroSolid, where I, Marconi, is landed with the duty of pulling apart what will be one of the greatest titles of our time. It's an honour, but of course a daunting one at best. Even though it's only been with us for nearly 3 years, there is already myth and legend surrounding this 4th chapter in the life of Solid Snake. It appears untouchable, unrelenting. It's the TV show you remember from childhood and the moment you saw your first love across the room. The enormity of the task is only judged by the many that have been eager to ignore any faults it might have in order to preserve the parable of this aging snake. A snake that has one too many times tried to shed his skin in the order for renewal. He hopes to change the pattern littered across his body, but probably what is more heartbreaking than most of the other titles in the series, Guns of the Patriots plays out as a step-by-step scenario of the horrors he and his father have all seen before.
War has changed. It's no longer about nations, ideologies, or ethnicity. It's an endless series of proxy battles fought by mercenaries and machines. War and its consumption of life has become a well-oiled machine. War has changed. ID tag soldiers carry ID tagged weapons, use ID tag gear. Nanomachines inside their bodies enhance and regulate their abilities. Genetic control, information control, emotion control, battlefield control. Everything is monitored and kept under control. War has changed. The age of deterrence has become the age of control. All in the name of averting catastrophe from weapons of mass destruction. And he who controls the battlefield controls history. War has changed. When the battlefield is under total control, war becomes routine.
Guns of the Patriots is the 4th act in the Metal Gear saga, which has now seen Solid Snake once again be convinced to come out of retirement, to once again attempt to try and take down who he knows now to be his brother, albeit a psychologically transplanted version of his brother in the body of his father's old foe, Ocelot. It's an odd merging of two different stories that all started on Shadow Moses 10 years ago, when Snake seemed to be but a child playing in a grown-up's world. The strange thing is, compared to when he was in his prime on the tanker some 5 years ago, Snake now appears too old and aged to once again be treading the battlefield. However, if there is one thing that Snake is very aware of, it's the pull of fate and the twist of destiny, that the job uncompleted within the Fox archipelago is on once again. Unlike those who have gone before him, there is no fighting the will and drive of the soldier. At heart, Guns of the Patriots runs on the theory of science, but the practice of the spiritual, grounded in complicated nanomachine technology and firm economic discipline, but lifted by the will of human endeavour, fear and consequence. It's a disparity that has been incubated by the previous 3 titles, only to really come to a flourish in this final display of that which can be explained and that which cannot, where war is defined by lines of life and death. The greatest skill on the battlefield is being able to embrace that which at first seems unquantifiable. Snake's technology has a mind of its own, compared to his regimented moves and actions. Even in the game, he is told by Naomi that his own body is from his control. In fact, by the end of the game, as GW is finally conquered, the bounds of science and the predictable seem to all break away, and there is little left of Snake except that which makes him a human. The title starts with the biggest return of all for Snake, his homecoming to the battlefield. Old and haggard, his body supported by technology and instinct, you seem to almost stumble through the first few stages. It should feel normal, but the environment is nothing but natural this time for Snake. The wild vistas of silence are gone. The setting is already ravaged by battle, and war is no longer hidden from the view. Nor is it a concept acted out in a slow dance of stealth and metaphor. Now you're in the middle of it, a disparate cog in a machine. It all seems a mile away from the places we have long since been used to. The industrial silence, the whispering rigs or wandering grass. All of them had their moments of battle, but these were just punctuation in a usually calm progression. Here it's hard to quell your sense for stealth, the exposure to danger much more immediate, but still just as tense. Even the guns you have wielded with precision before are now out of your control, until you meet with Drebin, who fills Snake again with more of the unnatural, more of that which he needs to learn and understand. Even though at this point Snake already seems out of his depth, there is still the familiar to keep the head above water. Meryl plays the confident striding soldier, who you still can't help feel like you're responsible for her paternal protection, but even she has moved on, maybe even more control now than she was before. She represents what Snake was. She looks fresh and inviting, and talks with confidence and knowledge. It is not the questionable and vulnerable Meryl we saw in the first game. In fact, Snake is indeed the more vulnerable this time around. There might be constant shifts in Guns of the Patriots, but they are shifts to patterns we have become familiar with. History is beginning to repeat itself, and the shifts in style and presentation are all signs that this age is coming to an end. That it is with this game that Snake will hand over for someone to start again. Whereas Big Boss lost his closest thing to a mother in the first shift of an age, Snake this time is also losing that which kept him fighting, which is the ability to fight altogether. When Liquid first strikes his control over the nanomachines in his body, this marks the beginning of Snake's final march. Through this title, Snake moves from creature to human, from machine to man, from the industrial to nature.
Hey Snake, something I've been meaning to ask you. That canyon, isn't that where you demolished Raven's tank? How'd you do it anyway?
How? Well, grenades.
That's it? You didn't use an anti-tank missile or something?
Didn't have one.
Your technique is kind of, well, how do I put this? Archaic when it comes to fighting tanks. Honestly, I don't think it'd work on today's main battle tanks.
Well, that's how I did it. What do you want me to say?
You know, I asked an active duty army officer once, if an infantryman had to take on a tank one-on-one, how should he do it?
And what was his answer?
Don't. He swore there's no way in hell a single infantryman could take down a tank by himself.
Huh. Interesting.
I always suspected there was a little something crazy about you, Snake. But hearing that story, now I know it. You're nuts. Single-handedly taking out a tank? That's crazy. You're insane.
Otacon, is this your idea of a compliment?
Yes. You're the toughest, craziest, most hardcore badass on the planet. You're the shit.
His metamorphosis is slow, painful, and unforgiving, as he slowly tries to regain control of that which he has lost, but he's not the only one going through this tumultuous shift. All this is mirrored and echoed in his fights with each of the Beauty and Beast core. The four twisted women carved out of stress and trauma by Liquid into fighting and defeating Snake are nothing of their former selves, all equally punished for being nothing but in the wrong place at the wrong time, their true selves repressed by nanomachines and cause for action. They care not to question why their actions should take place, but conduct themselves to their purpose, unflinching and under invisible control.
I hear them in my head. The screams! Make them stop! I don't want to hear them anymore! I'm scared. I'm so scared. My head hurts.
They each represent parts of Snake, parts of his past, and parts of his life slowly being returned to a natural state. With the death of each one, he can purge his soul and body into remembering that there is life outside of the fight. It's easy how to see resemblance can be cast to previous Metal Gear games, with obviously each of them taking on the names of characters that Snake have encountered before. We have the octopus, the mantis, the raven and the wolf, all parts of Snake and his journey through Shadow Moses. This coincidence cannot be ignored, and it certainly isn't laziness on the part of Hideo Kojima. He has selected to use the same 4 characters again for a purpose. They highlight more than a steady indication to the greatness of previous games. They show that Snake is a man made up of nothing but his legend. He is nothing to most people but what he has achieved before, and the mistakes made years after. A soldier is only as good as his last kill, and the Beauty and Beast core reminds Snake that for him to revert back to a natural state, he must face up to the stress and punishment of something he thought he had already laid to rest.
How old was she?
I'd say about 20. But she had years of soldier's rage hidden away in that youthful body of hers.
Soldiers?
Yeah, the soldiers of Ake, a place that hasn't seen peace in a long, long time. She was captured by one side or another, and kept caged up like an animal, along with God knows how many other kids.
Anonymous violence.
Exactly. It's unknown whether her captors were with the government or the rebels. In any case, they got their kicks by abusing these helpless little kids day after day after day. That constant barrage, that battlefield rage slowly built up inside their bodies, their minds. The kids tried to keep each other's spirits up, always clinging to the hope that someone would come to their rescue, barely surviving off of scraps of food. But those soldiers didn't stop. They called the kids parasites and shit-eating ravens, beat them even harder. Then one morning, the soldiers just up and left, leaving the surviving kids to be eaten alive by the birds. Almost like one of those sky burials.
Looking deeper at the core also shows a stark resemblance to each boss of each previous game that has gone before as well. Decoy Octopus has the tentacles as solid as Snake and the emotion of joy. Raging Raven has the penchant for explosives, just like we saw in Fat Man. Also, her fury is an emotion bound up in her love of a good ignition. Crying Wolf shares a railgun with Fortune, as well as the emotions of the sorrow and the end. Finally, Screaming Mantis throws knives like Vamp and emotes with fear and pain. It's a loose correlation, but the simple imagery and emotions reflected in each of them is another sign of the cyclical nature of the Metal Gear Solid series. It was a cycle that started with Metal Gear and is now reaching its fruition with Guns of the Patriots. The head of the snake is finally reaching its tail. It can't be argued that the biggest part of Snake's life is not the bosses. It's not his relationship with Liquid, Big Mama or the boss. It's not the slow deterioration of his aging body. All of these certainly resign him to a realisation that he's reverting back to a natural form. But it's one place in particular that shows him this more than ever. It's a stark metaphor for Hideo to use, but he plants it well within the story. Just well enough to make it ring true, but not to let it blur and feed back in another show of repetitive recoil.
What's a Russian gunship doing here?
Wow, you must be crazy to fly Hind in this kind of weather.
Who's that?
Nice to meet you, Snake. It's an honor to speak to a living legend like yourself. What's wrong?
Shadow Moses. This is where the legend may not have begun, but where the wax was melted and sealed. Approach this time on land in a virtual whiteout. The facility on the Fox archipelago seems to land on top of you as you once again find yourself outside of the once hive of fevering activity. Now though, the once bustling research centre is redundant and relapsed, receding back to nature. Searchlights no longer function, cameras no longer twist and are instead buckled over in time. The regimented pattern of soldiers moving in their gridiron has been replaced by silence and, probably more annoyingly for Snake, the unpredictable and unnatural suicide geckos that stalk the main hallways. This place is not just part of the main story arc, as Liquid attempts to steal a nuclear weapon that isn't ID tagged, a weapon still in its natural form, but also it's a stark reference to who Snake has become. Without the threat of violence, without the promise of stealth, void of the grand echoes of a master or a purpose, with no war to fight, no research to conduct or battle, Shadow Moses is superfluous, a part of a machine that Snake long since stuck a SOCOM into the spokes. Since then it's become forgotten, only remembered by those who were there and those who fought amongst its walls. Outside of that, the distant sight of a collapsed warehouse to war is a sign of nothing more than a passing age, something constructed by man, only to be defeated by man and then deconstructed by nature. All of that which is happening to Shadow Moses is happening to Snake, built by external forces and designed for only one purpose. Snake was nothing but a shell to be housed by the regimented and by the research. It was created for the same reasons that Shadow Moses was once created, but just like the technology that swims through his body, now the needs of war may consume more, but the tools to do it seem to get smaller and less predictable. The things that made up Snake resemble more of the suicide gecko now, a horde of emotions, out of control, fixated on one thing, clamouring onto anything that passes by, sticking to lonely and wandering ideals in attempts to attain some form of salvation. They are programmed for this, but who is to say that Snake was never programmed to act the way he did? But it's only now, as he hears the faint echoes of Codec, that he's once again grasping onto that man who existed more outside these walls, the man who is more human than Snake.
Could you be Snake? Are you Solid Snake? The legendary Solid Snake? You?
Don't worry. You'll land back on them once you meet me. The reality is no match for legends, I'm afraid.
I unlocked the cargo door for you.
Where are you?
Where I can see ya.
Liquid, though, does get hold of the nuke in the end, and after a stunning battle where Snake rides an old foe to take on yet another revised boss battle, Liquid reveals Outer Haven, the ideal and device that will bring him control of the Patriots, and so, he claims, fulfill the purpose of Big Boss. And so this begins the final act of Snake, a warrior. Making it through the heart of Shadow Moses for one last time shows us that we're playing out his last scenes, that we have got Snake wrong, that there is more to this person than the man of war we've always made him out to be. As he gets flung aboard Outer Haven, he sneaks for the final time in what must be the hardest section to sneak through successfully, made purposefully so by Hideo, to show the change in the world around him. A close secluded environment would have been heaven for Snake to enjoy, but here that idea has grown. The world around Snake is moving on, and he's no longer part of its future. The enemies bound and launch across the screen, whereas Snake, when he has the chance, pats his back and yearns for a cigarette. After defeating the final member of the Corps, even Psycho Mantis returns to herald the passing of Snake, as the only man who has ever been able to penetrate into his mind.
Very well. I will show you the power of the world's greatest mind reader and psychokinesis. I'll start by reading your personality. Your past. That's right. This is no trick. It's true. What? Where is your data? Where is it saved? There's no memory card. Damn, your skills have improved. Or rather, your hardware.
Deeper into Outer Haven you go, with suicide geckos launching more and more attacks. The ferocious battlers clinging on to life, carrying out their purpose with a motorized desire. They are the last parts of Snake, dying as he reaches the centre of GW. But there is one final part to overcome. The final purging of this man. The final part of his drama that has been in play over years and years of battle. Finally, it's at this point that his life marks its full circle. To get to the centre of GW, Snake must walk through what seems like an endless corridor of microwaves. As he walks through, the armour is physically stripped from him. The player becomes no longer sensitive to the slightest button press, but instead is putting all their might into pressing just one, in hopes to keep Snake alive. The journey seems to go on forever. Nothing is said to survive past this point. The guns are gone. The suit melted away. It is only the physical that is left. His scars and his fist. Top of the carcass of GW, Snake fights only boosted by injection to finally perform the final part of his journey. He defeats that which has kept him going, that which has continued his yearning for battle. With the death of his brother in the most honourable of fashions, another Metal Gear Solid game comes to an end with a fist fight, though this time it's one that finishes the legend of Snake. He coughs and splutters, a deep awakening soul, as that which has control over him finally passes on. Meryl gets married, Otacon takes on responsibility for Sunny, and Snake's father dies in front of his eyes. Saving Snake from death and revealing that now he has completed the circle that his father began, he can now, like him once again, reform himself to a natural form. He realises that he must carry himself apart from that which has gone before, and begin to live for no one but himself. Whether he rebuilds that life, or deviates from the patterns that used to go before him, the only thing that Snake knows is true, is that the circle will start again. As his legend passes, as he reverts to a former self, the pattern of war, science, family and individuals will start somewhere, at some time. So that's it. That's the end of part 4 of InRetroSolid, and just like Snake, we are slowly reverting back to a more natural format here on the InRetroSpect podcasts. Next week it finishes all off with the final part 5 of our InRetroSolid specials. But if you've enjoyed them so far, then don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or the Zune Marketplace, where people will always know where to find the best in gaming content. So next week, we'll all be back for the final part of the InRetroSolid series. And if you've missed any of it or want to listen to it again, then you can find out more information at www.inretrospectpodcast.com. But from me, Marconi, for now, goodbye.
And coming up next week is the final instalment of InRetroSolid, as the team get together to discuss the series as a whole.
It's it's that wonderful, some would argue perhaps self-indulgent, but it brings to the surface a sense of nostalgia. But the story doesn't end there. The Shadow Moses incident, I think, is Act 4. It's Act 4 of the game.
Yeah.
The story doesn't end there. It is something there as a reminder before the final hurdle, which I think is of incredible significance for those who would perhaps say that it is lazy, it's self-indulgent. I think one of the major sort of bones of contention against that would be the fact that the game doesn't end there. It's really just, it's Act 4 of Metal Gear Solid 4. It's really just the final hurdle before the game. But you have to have this final hurdle, you have to jump this final hurdle. It's there as a reminder of what was and a springboard into what could be.
That's all still to come on In Retro Solid.